Welcome to another presentation of the Relationship Toolbox, a show about learning skills for building healthy relationships with others. So far, our shows have been about building relationships with people we want to be close to. But what if we have to work with people we don't want to be close to? What skills then do we use, and how do we apply the skills that we've been talking about in that situation? Excuse me. I'm thinking about a situation where there may be two parents who are divorced or not living together, and they share a child that they have to co-parent, but otherwise they would rather not have anything to do with each other. Or a situation where maybe you have a relative who can be very difficult to deal with. Or one that we're going to deal with now, which is, what about someone with a very difficult behavior to deal with in the workplace? So how do we use these communication skills then to deal with a person like that? So Traci, what are some common behaviors that we might see from someone in the workplace that could really make life difficult for us?
Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is someone trying to take credit for your work, right? So, and sometimes intentional, sometimes not, but or sometimes maybe someone else walks up to them and says, "Oh, this is a great job," and they just take the credit without saying that you did the work. Opposite of that, maybe someone blaming you for something that you didn't do. So maybe someone who's upset about something and they came up to you and are pointing the finger at you when you weren't responsible for that behavior. So, Marsha, what are some? Or even
being rolled into a collective when somebody in your group was, but like everybody has to take the blame,
take
for
responsibility.
It. Like, be specific, yeah. Then there are also, the people who are just constantly negative. Everybody has a bad day, but then there's some people who are just programmed and they lean in that direction and just like, I don't want to be around that energy all the time.
It kind of takes the energy right out of the room, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you don't mind if it's something specific, but if that's just the baseline, that can be difficult. Or somebody who is just always saying about all the work he or she does, and we all have a lot of work to do, and that you just don't understand. And if you're shouldering your part of the load and you don't feel valued for your contributions, that could be a drag too.
Yeah. And what about those employees who just never seem to get to work on time, right? So everyone's sort of waiting for them, chronically waiting for them if there's a group project, if there's a meeting, if there's something else going on, and they are just chronically late. That's always difficult to deal with too.
Yeah.
You think about those things, and sometimes people point out other people's faults a lot. You ever notice that when they point out other people's faults to kind of make themselves look good and puff themselves up a little bit?
Or to detract from what they're doing.
That can be a little bit frustrating also.
There are also people who might borrow tools or supplies and not return them at all, or return them in bad condition, or they are leaving a communal work area in disarray, and you've got to take time out of your work to remedy that. Or people that you see using work for personal business, either on the phone or they're doing something on the side, and you're not supposed to be the snitch, and you don't want to, but there are plenty of things that you would also like to be doing, and you can't because conscientiously you're trying to get your work done. So that can be tense. It happens sometimes. We all have to kind of borrow time, and you're giving back later. Maybe you stay late or something. I don't know. But that can irritate you sometimes too.
Yeah. Another big one I think that strikes me is when people talk about people behind their backs. So they aren't confronting the issue directly, but they're coming to you or other people, and you hear them talking about other people behind their backs
a real
lot.
temptation.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes that in and of itself just causes cliques at work, kind of, those cliques that, I don't know, and then people feel left out, and
or
there's
you
a whole
need
nother
to choose sides. Which is hard. Like you don't know how to be in that space when somebody's talking about somebody else.
Right. And especially we as mediators tend to stay right in the middle of things. So it's very hard because we know we don't choose sides very often. So so that's particularly tricky.
And you don't know whether by not saying anything, people are assuming that you're agreeing or disagreeing, or so that can be tricky.
Very awkward.
Yeah.
So we could go on and on and on and give lots of examples, and we'll try to loop back with some of these. But there are serious consequences to this kind of behavior with a staff, a bunch of employers. You waste a lot of time. And managers spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with conflict instead of the task, the product or the service. Sometimes people stay home in order to avoid situations when it's really, really difficult. And they spend time complaining to other people about the problem rather than addressing the problem or avoiding it.
And that affects your reputation as well, your personal reputation, but also perhaps the company's reputation, right? If you're talking to people outside of work or inside of work, that affects that reputation as well.
And your energy is just spent worrying about the situation rather than your work. And it can lead to lower motivation, decreased time spent on work, poor concentration because you're worried about all the office or factory or workplace politics and how you're going to be with people, and your creativity. It could sap your creativity.
Your sleep.
And in the long run, it could contribute to turnover in terms of if it's not a good place to work, people start looking elsewhere and trying to find a better place. So then you've got to bring new employees up to speed and train them to replace it, and these relationships can disrupt the workplace.
And if you never really addressed the actual problem, it might just continue throughout the turnover.
New
right?
face.
Same situation, just different people.
Even if the person that was allegedly the ringleader is let go or dismissed or leaves, somebody else may rise to that situation if you don't deal with the problem. Because it's kind of like you have to
still there.
The pattern is in place, so you've got to fit it. So it can also contribute to health costs and poor health, stress. You don't enjoy. You spend a lot of time with the people that you work with.
You do.
And if it's not a good, healthy place, then that's going to feed at you. You're not productive, and things could be done poorly or not on time. Again, it could reflect poorly on you, on the company, and there are, it could destroy relationships. You might even lose your job.
I tend to daydream sometimes when I'm stressed and thinking about those types of things. So when you say productivity, that resonates with me a lot, because if I'm daydreaming and I'm thinking about whatever that problem was or is, I'm not really focusing on what I'm doing, and so that really affects it a lot.
Sometimes daydreaming can foster creativity, but not if it's about a stressful relationship or a conflict at work. It can be you have the space to kind of let that come into you, but not if you're like thinking, oh, how am I going to deal with Tom?
So how do we deal with things like that, Tom?
Well, one of the first things is to understand that all of us as human beings have some basic needs in our lives, no matter who we are, male, female, no matter what position we have, what status in life. And if those needs are not met, they really invite acting out behavior or illness, stress, so forth. So the first step really is to try to determine what basic need might this person's behavior be illustrating with it. So I thought maybe we could take a look here at some of these basic needs and what they are. The first one is the physical needs that we have. And those are the most basic things. Is the office warm enough? Is it too cold? Has someone got the window open, letting things in? So those things can lead to our losing our attention and so forth, because we're constantly saying, why do I have to deal with this?
Somebody has the radio on or something too.
Right, and you mentioned sleep too. If we're not getting enough sleep and we're coming to work each day deprived of sleep, we're going to start acting in a way that may not be so helpful for other workers.
So it could be the physical space, but it could also be our physical
Correct,
Yeah.
right.
Or physicality.
The second one here is safety, and that is we all require a need to be physically safe as well as emotionally safe. So if we are going into a workplace that is actually dangerous, there might be the air pollution, it might be through machinery that's not protected from us, or it could be an emotional safety. There are cliques, as you mentioned, going on. There may be harassment going on with it. That can make things very difficult for us to try to deal with it. And then, as you say, we might start trying to avoid being in that situation. The next one is love, acceptance, and respect, sort of those three rolled into one. Most of us are not going to work to experience love, but we certainly want respect, and we want to feel a part of the group.
We want to be valued.
We want to be valued, yes. And if that is not occurring, at least to the extent that we need, we can begin to, again, act out in ways that then create problems for everyone. The next one is choice, that we have a need to have some choice over our own destiny. It does not mean that we should be able to decide everything and have our way with everything. That's not what we're talking about. It's being able to say, this is what I'm attempting to do, and I do have some choice along the way. I am in control to some extent of what's going on in my life. The next one is success. And in success, I think all of us understand this one, that if we attempt over and over again to do something and we just keep failing at it, what's going to happen? Soon we're going to give up and say, I can't do it. Sometimes that pervades other type of thinking too, and say, well, if I can't do that, I guess I'm not very worthy. So it can be kind of insidious in the way it works.
Or if you feel that somebody's setting you up for failure, you could just say, I don't want to be here, I'm done.
Right, exactly. But it's the sense of no matter what I do, I can't win. I can't do anything about this. The next one is opportunity. And this one is somewhat unique. I think of an example of perhaps if I got married very young in my life and started having children with it, and now I'm in my 40s and 50s, and I really wanted to do certain things in my life, but I really didn't have the opportunity. And now at age 40 or 50, do I have that opportunity? And if we don't get that, the impact of not having opportunity usually is resentment and frustration with our life. So it's important that that need be satisfied as well. And finally, a sense of purpose, an identity. What do we stand for? What are we existing for? That's very important. And if we're in the workplace that does not value what we value in ourselves and what we think we can contribute, then there can become a real conflict in that way as well. So
That's
all
important.
these...
Yeah, I'm sorry, that you just hit on something that really always strikes me, is that when they don't match, right, what you value in yourself, when it doesn't match, really with any partner, right, whether it's a work partner, a home partner, whatever it is, friendships, that really does have to match. When you value something in yourself, it's critical that other people see that and value that in you as well. Yeah.
And the point being that these needs are always operating. They are operating to different levels depending on our personality and our upbringing, but they're there. And if they're not satisfied in some ways, we're going to react in this. And this is where the source of conflict can come, or just dissatisfaction, or illness and stress. So once we've determined that, okay, we all have these basic needs, how is that getting played out in this situation I'm having with this employee or employees or perhaps even a boss? So Marsha, can you talk a little bit about how we might get at that?
Certainly we can use some of the skills we've talked about in other programs, and the I message is a great tool to talk about any situation with a child, a spouse, a neighbor, a coworker. And we could remind you the different stages. Basically, you're going to mention the person's name in a tone that's respectful to get their attention and to say, to alert them that you want to talk. and then say when, and it will be a description, not a judgment, describing whatever the behavior is.
That's a real important one, isn't it? Because people will tend naturally to be critical of it. So when they do some name calling or say when you act like a fool or when you act so irresponsibly, and who wants
or
to...
you're so inconsiderate.
Yes, who wants to listen to anything else you have to say after hearing that? So if you describe, like you said, when you forget to do this, and I have to pick up the slack, now we're describing.
When you don't return my whatever.
Yes.
And then I feel, you know, what's the feeling I have as a consequence of that behavior? I feel frustrated because I can't do my job.
Right. Because you're stressed, right? When you don't, you just said something. So when you don't return my email, I feel stressed or frustrated.
And people have different senses of timing in terms of how quickly you should get back to somebody, because it's an emergency for them, but it may not be an emergency for you. But I'm even thinking about, you know, when you tools at work, you know, you may be borrowing something that we both use, and if you don't bring it back, or you bring it back broken, or you bring it back late, and that's hard too.
Could I add too that when in that I feel part, typically people might go into a thought rather than a feeling. So when people start with I feel like, and the word like comes in, we know they're not talking about a feeling anymore. They're talking about a thought,
And
a
it could be a
perception.
whole narration. I feel like you.
Right. A lot of times, I was going to say, a lot of times it's followed by you.
And that defeats the whole point of the I message, where it's coming from me, and you can't really refute my feelings. And
So one word generally, emotions, and you can
Although
have
there might be more than one emotion.
more than one, or there might be even contradictory emotions with it, but they are labeled in that way, yes.
And then we could ask for a request. You know, state what you what would you be willing to do, or could we agree that you will, or how about? And so you are offering a solution to this.
Okay, and there's also a step in because, which you can omit, but because is giving the why, basically, of why I think I'm feeling this way.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Yep. So
get
some
that part.
examples of that might be, I don't know, if we're going to take something that we are going to think about, you know, there are employees who constantly sort of tend to criticize someone else, right? And sometimes it's done in a kind sort of way, you know, like the, I never thought to do that way, you know, that kind of thing. Or
even though, why would you do it that way?
Right,
Let me show you how to do that.
Let me show you, right. Those very kind, sort of not so kind offers of let me help you, show you a better way, kind of showing you how they would do it and how you should see things done their way. And just, you know, it's important to note also here that identifying that need, and we're going to talk about maybe what someone's need is when they do that, but in identifying someone's need, it doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with it and you don't want to judge it. It just means that you're identifying it and acknowledging it. And that's really all you're doing. You're not judging it from your own perspective and how you would feel, right? You might not feel the same way, or why they shouldn't feel that way, which is where a lot of people tend to go. So let's use that as an example. So something along the lines of that. If I were coming to you and letting you know why you are doing what you're doing incorrectly and why you should be doing it a different way, what might...
So I look at all these
what might
basic
my need
needs
be?
and what might be operating here.
Right. What do you think?
What your need would be? You might need to feel, respect because you have like institutional knowledge about something that I don't need, that I don't know yet. And
You feel you do really know how to do
you
something
might,
better,
right.
and you're trying to share it, but it's coming across
in a condescending,
Yes.
critical way. But
What about choice, too? I think sometimes
That struck me as well.
people feel that, or even success, I guess, is that they're feeling that the way to be success is to be in control and do the very best. And you're not doing the very best from their standpoint, their point of view.
Right.
Therefore, they're going to act on that need with it.
Yep.
without much regard for your need.
Right, right. And maybe I need that need for acknowledgement that I am doing it the best.
Yes, yes.
Right? I might need for someone to acknowledge that, that I am the best
Yeah.
at what I do. So what if we take another example, and we look at, as we talked about before, an employee who's just late all the time and kind of always making other people wait for them. What is that about, do you think?
Wow, I think that also can be a sense of control and choice with it, that if I need to do this to this extent, it's going to make me late, I'm still going to do it. I need to have that kind of control over what I'm doing with it. But that's not the only need that could be in there.
Right.
It might be, again, that respect, Marsha, that you were talking about before with it, that I respect myself in there, but not necessarily someone else's.
Someone else's
Right.
time.
I think people who are late are I mean, some people may do it to be manipulative, but I think most people are just not aware. They just don't know the consequences of their behavior on other people.
Yeah.
And how it impacts them in their day. And
Because it's one of those situations where they understand why,
Yeah.
and it's totally justifiable.
And we've talked about
We
that
have
in other
talked about it,
shows,
yeah.
how we just, you know,
like-
you're not paying attention when you are running late and you're doing the things that you need to do. It's all justified in your
Right.
mind, right? Well,
Yeah.
the traffic, you know, I woke up a little bit late and the coffee machine
Yeah,
didn't
and I
work
didn't
and the kids were
couldn't find the
getting to
scraper,
school, right?
yeah.
Right.
So it all makes sense to you, but when you get to the workplace, that's what it appears like to someone else, and it still to them has a feeling of disrespect, right? So that's a common.
It's one of
common
those
thing
things
thrown
that
out there.
we excuse in ourselves, but don't excuse in other people.
Right. So we're meeting our need, but not in any way saying somebody else might have the same need, and therefore we have to monitor our own needs by someone else's needs as well.
Yeah.
Which is such a key thing, and that's where that all comes in, right? Acknowledging, that's what we're trying to do, is acknowledge someone else's need. Again, even if we don't agree with it, even if we might feel differently and need something different, we're acknowledging someone else's need.
That's why the iMessage could be helpful, because just to explain, like when you are late.
Right. So maybe one last example, just a person who is frequently kind of doing personal things and talking on their cell phone and maybe always on their computer, but for a personal reason. What might that need be?
I think sometimes, and again, there's no one need that always
Right.
comes up, but that might be in the acceptance, that connection, that I feel a strong need to be connected to people, and including my friends. And therefore, I'm going to be using my phone and everything to make sure I'm still in contact with them and getting that feedback that I'm important to them
Yep.
with it, even if I'm using work time to do that.
Right. And some of the things that we might not know about that people could shed light on, maybe there are some safety issues involved in some of these, right? But they might be a little bit under the surface and maybe not something people talk about.
Right.
So they might be in there and we just don't know them.
Yeah, I need
So
to
it's
know.
a combination of being aware of what need we're doing in our behavior, but also communicating what we need to others
Right.
With it.
And sometimes we don't even notice our own needs, right? So sometimes it makes it that much
That's
harder
hard.
to look at somebody else's needs and think that we know what they are, but we don't even know our own.
Right.
Right.
I find in mediation that people generally don't even think of behavior this way.
Absolutely.
They're more likely to come up with a label.
Right.
You know, oh, you're just acting narcissistic, or you're doing this or doing that.
Yep.
Put a label on it, which leaves us with nothing to do about it
Right.
then.
Right.
Whereas when someone says, I think you have a strong need for control on this thing because you want to achieve something, so how can we modify that need enough so that it meets my need as well to be important, and so forth.
Yeah.
And then both of us can work on our need.
And I'm a big fan of trying to meet both people's needs, even if you don't need to tone them down maybe. You know, how do we meet this need and meet this need?
Sure.
But we may, to kind of back it up a little bit, we may be assuming that we know what their needs are.
Yes.
And we've got to check in, too.
Absolutely.
So listening, asking,
Yes.
it's really a good place to start. You know, you could start with listening and asking, or you could start with the iMessage and tell your point of view, but you kind of need to blend both of those in.
Right.
Because you may not know.
Right.
Well,
You likely don't know.
yeah. What is it that is motivating or this
So playing
behavior?
that, being curious that we've talked about in other
Like,
shows
help me
is important.
understand.
Right, help me understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, or what,
And that the other thing, especially in the business world, I think there's more of a chance to even judge somebody and saying, you will get this done. This is part of what your job is. And to deal with these needs, we have to feed the need, but feed it appropriately and acceptably in the environment. But if we just ignore the need and say, you will do what you're told, basically, we leave the person then to perhaps stop doing what they're doing there, but that need hasn't been satisfied, so it comes up in another way.
Right.
It hasn't been resolved.
Right. And when it hasn't been addressed or resolved, it'll just keep coming back again, over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So, and then that's what results in all of the things that you were talking about
Those
before.
severe
the lack
consequences,
of
yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
the people might leave their job ultimately if they're that.
Or be fired.
Yeah, right. Either or.
And then wonder
Well,
why.
Right.
but it's high stakes here as
Yeah,
well when you're
can be.
talking about your livelihood.
Right.
And you may feel like you need to stay in this situation because you have to. But, and then you add the hierarchy. There's, employee to employee that are maybe of the same status, but then you've got managers and supervisors and bosses. So it's helpful to have these reminders of these strategies that you can use. Being curious, asking, reflecting back what they said, restating it, or using the iMessage to say, this is what I feel because, and could we do something else?
You also bring up another good point, Marsha, and that is that if you feel the need to go to a manager, someone else, to help deal with this, if you approach that person with criticism of the other employee, that can really go some negative places. But if you can approach the manager with saying, I have a need for the following things, and this is kind of interfering with that, can you help me deal with that? It has a much different inviting participation from the manager with it. So I think, again, thinking in terms of needs is critical.
We might need, speaking about needs, take some of these examples that we wanted to explore today and carry it over into another episode, because I think that the time that we spend with our coworkers is pretty big, and
It is. I
to
think
really
even more than our partners.
maybe
sometimes.
it's a different level of intimacy.
Sure.
And, but I think to really flesh out this work and with some more examples that may resonate with people, I think it might be a good use of our time to do this again.
So let's take this one here that we've
got about 2 minutes.
mentioned. Okay, that if a fellow employee is talking about, say, Mary, and comes up with maybe while getting coffee, and I heard that Mary really had it out with her husband last night, and she's going for a divorce. And you're a friend of Mary's, and you're overhearing these people talking about this. That's going to create some reaction. And before long, we could have some pretty negative feelings operating with it. So let's use some of these things to see how could we approach that. The first thing we're looking at is what might be the need here
the need
of
for the person to be talking about it.
Yeah, the gossiping person.
And the choice. I mean, I think there's a choice there, right? You have to make a choice of whether you're going to get involved in that discussion or if you're going to back off. That's one of the things that stands
Right,
out
that's for the
me.
person overhearing it.
Yes, for the person overhearing it. For the other, for the other person as well, right? They have the same choice.
For the person gossiping about it, what might be his or her need to do that? And one of the ones that stands out to me right away is this acceptance with it, that connection with people.
Right.
That I'm saying to people in a way, I've got some juicy news to tell you. I'm important.
Sometimes having information is power.
Right.
Whether it's about a relationship or about something that happened in a meeting. It could be talking about cross information within the same organization, and that gives you power and a sense of value and a sense of stature.
So if we were going to go maybe into an iMessage.
Yeah, if I determine that's the need, then what could the iMessage be? Right. Mary, or no, not Mary, because Mary's the one that's being talked about.
Well, I could briefly say something along the lines,
to this employee, when I hear you talking about Mary, I feel very frustrated and annoyed with this,
Yeah.
because I'm a close friend and I don't think she would want this to be talked about.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to, would you be willing to talk about your own things, your own life with it, and not talk about other people's?
Well, when we only have a few seconds left, it makes me
I get
sad.
stressed.
Bye for today. Thank you.
So that concludes our show for today, and we thank you for joining us, and we hope that you will join us again for another episode of the Relationship Toolbox.